is not a good explanation. These claims, the best explanation is were actually made. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree with them or not. You can agree with them if you want to, but the claims are made. And this accounts, and this only really accounts for the genesis of the Christian faith, for the impact of Jesus Christ, and for the transformation of lives. So if you don't accept them, you'd say, okay, he said it, but it's not true. It's false. Two possibilities. He lied. He knew they were false. He's an imposter. He's an opportunist, maybe like the false Messiah, Shabbatai Tzvi. What's his motive, though? Why do people lie? They lie for a reason. Even the enemies of Jesus don't attribute lying to him. Nor is the other possibility realistic, that he said these nonsensical things and he really believed them, because then now you're attributing lunacy to Jesus. In my life, I've met a number of people, maybe you have too, who've actually claimed to be God. I don't mean New Agers. I mean people who came to me and telling me that they are Jesus Christ. This is not what we see. There's no hint of instability in the life of Jesus Christ. The evidence is overwhelmingly against the lunacy hypothesis, legend and liar, and that leaves us with only one fourth and final possibility, that he spoke the truth. And if that's the case, he's Lord and Messiah. Now, my second line of reasoning is very simple, that miracles are consistent with the action of God in Jesus Christ if God were communicating to the world. Someone says, give me the Bible without miracles, then I'll believe it. What, you want a Bible without God also? Yeah, that's not a book of Bible, that's just a book of man. Now, interestingly, Robert Price says, based on Mark 8, where Jesus refused to give a confirming sign to his critics, that Jesus didn't do miracles. Performing miracles would be ipso facto sinking to the level of the critics, page 133, the incredible shrinking Son of Man. In fact, I would argue the opposite. First, the book of Mark is full of the miracles of Jesus, not just the time he refused to do a miracle, but I would actually turn the argument on its head and say that the absence of miracles is what would be suspicious. If a book is really from God, we'd expect some trace of the miraculous. So I think the miracles are actually a positive. And one more thing to add, in first century Judaism, there was an expectation that the Messiah would do the miracles. And we know that from documents like the one found in the Dead Sea Caves, 4Q 521, third line of reasoning. The Old Testament prophecies confirm the identity of Jesus. He fulfills so many prophecies in the law, the prophets, the writings. That is the three divisions of Hebrew Scripture. And not just explicit prophecy, but also fulfilling the larger institutions of prophet, priest, and king. What is the anointed one? Well, that's what the Messiah is, Hamashiach in Hebrew. What is the Christ? That's from the Greek Christos. Christos, or Christus in Latin, the anointed one. Who was anointed in the Old Testament? Prophet, priest, and king. Jesus brings all three together. This is not explicit prophecy, it's implicit. You may say, the monks got bored in the Middle Ages and they fudged those prophecies. I know it. The problem is there are extant manuscripts in the Dead Sea Scrolls that precede the time of the Christian church. They're from 2nd, 3rd century or 1st century BC. It just doesn't work. The prophecies are pretty powerful. Fourth line of evidence is the resurrection demonstrates also that he's God's son. Now, there's no resurrection if he doesn't die first. And there are at least 5 or 6 ancient writers outside the Bible who confirm his death. Josephus, Tacitus, Lucian, and so forth. John Dominic Crossan of the Jesus Seminar, a group of which Dr. Price is a member, said, that he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. But, interestingly, my opponent tonight suggests that maybe in the original gospel sources, Jesus survived crucifixion. Yet 99% of all scholars say he died, he was executed. Nearly all also agree that the tomb was empty on that Sunday morning. Friend and foe alike assume the body's missing. How to explain it? How to explain the appearances? Even Rudolf Bultmann, the father of demythologization, said that the disciples certainly believed Jesus had appeared to them. Modern New Testament scholar who's an atheist also, Gert Ludemann, says this: it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances won over the 12, changing them from paralyzed with fear to overflowing with confidence and proclamation. We have an early source. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8, one of my favorite passages, and I believe others as well. And this testifies to the death, burial, resurrection, and appearances of Jesus Christ to all the apostolic group. These appearances won over James, the actual brother of Jesus, who was skeptical as portrayed in Matthew, Mark, and John. James, who actually died for his faith, according to several sources. Hans Glass, skeptic New Testament critic, admits the conversion of James is one of the most sure proofs of the resurrection of Jesus. The appearances convinced not only a skeptic like James, but even an enemy of the faith like Saul of Tarsus. Paul not only persecuted, this guy dragged men and women off to prison and tortured them and tried to force them to back down. We know his story. He totally changes. What accounts for that? He even died for his faith. 1 Clement chapter 5. The earliest followers of Jesus were willing to live and die for him. This is the stuff of real history. None of them recanted. By my count, at least 8 of the 13 died a martyr's death. This is very different to a man-made fictive religion like Mormonism, where the majority of the witnesses back down. None of Jesus' apostles backed down. One tried to recant, then tried to unrecant. Of course, that was Judas. And on top of it all, who's presented as the first witnesses? It's the women, whose testimony was inadmissible in a court of law at that time. We know this from multiple documents. They were pretty confident. These are not the kind of flourishes you just make up. And all of this is found in 6 independent sources. Not just one, but 6 independent sources. Wow. The best explanation is not that Jesus rose from the dead by natural means. That chance is about nil. But that he was raised by God supernaturally and thus attested to be the Son of God, Romans 1:4, with power, is a better explanation. If so, then he is certainly who he claimed to be. He would be the Messiah. He would be the Christ. Fifthly, and just briefly, transformed lives suggest his present reality. What I mean is that lives touched by Christ worldwide, past and present, number in the millions and millions. I'm one of those people. Some of you in the audience today are some of those people. His presence can be felt. It's not irrational to adduce that as part of the evidence. It's not. Of course, I can't make my experience your experience, but you combine that with the other lines, and we have to take this seriously. In summary, although the ancient world was awash in myth, the story of Jesus Christ is not legend. He really did make extraordinary claims. This accounts for the transformations, ancient and modern, that we find. If the claims are false, of course, he'd be a liar or a lunatic. Neither of those is viable. And that pushes us to conclude that, well, they must be true. If that's the case, he's the Lord. This adequately explains the emergence of Christianity, the transforming power of his message, and it's backed up by his miracles, the prophecies, and his resurrection from the dead. For these reasons, I believe it is reasonable to conclude that Jesus Christ was a real person, not a legend, and in fact, he is the Messiah.
At this time, I want to invite Dr. Robert Price up for his 15-minute opening statement.
Andy Warhol's 15 minutes of fame. When long ago